Okay, on Patreon, I asked what people were interested in, and a number of people suggested that a video on color mixing would be of interest. So what I wanted to do now is, this is basically something that I did when I was starting out as a painter. I found these books, Color Theory, I think it's called, by Johann Sitten, and basically any book that I could find on color theory, and I just copied the little squares. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, but at the time I was having a lot of trouble finding somebody who could teach me any kind of color theory or color mixing, and so I just copied squares. And then it's been interesting over the years when I've talked to other professional painters, including a couple, one of whom is I consider to be a very good colorist. And these other painters told me that the same thing, they had the same problem when they were starting out, where they couldn't find anyone who would teach them how to mix colors. So they had also just taken books on color, and then rather than reading the text, they would just copy the color squares and practice mixing colors without being out in the field, just using little squares. So I thought I would do that today. I'm going to mix on my palette the colors, and I'll just go through. I thought today I'm going to mix sort of important greens that I use all the time. I mean, behind this painting I'm doing right now with lots and lots of greens in the studio. And so I thought I would go through what I consider to be the most important greens, show you how to mix them, and then if you guys want to try to just mix the colors, you don't have to, be outside fighting the bugs and the wind and the rain, the tourists, and you don't have to think about shapes. This is just how to mix colors. So here we go. These are all my dirty brushes. We will get some clean brushes out for you. So I'll go over briefly the colors that I'm going to be using as well. So here on the palette we have an ultramarine blue from Old Holland. It's a very dark one. This is a cobalt blue. This one's from Zaki, but honestly any cobalt blue should be fine. This is a cerulean blue from Zaki. This, I think over here, is Old Holland, but we're not going to use that. Then we have 3 cadmiums here and another 2 cadmiums there. These are all from Williamsburg. So we have a cadmium red medium, a cadmium red light, cadmium orange, cadmium yellow medium, and a cadmium yellow light. Then we have ochre and titanium white. The ochre, I believe, is from Zaki, and the titanium white is from Williamsburg. We will start with, let's see, we're just going to use greens that I use all the time. So here we have ultramarine and brand new brush, and it's shedding a bit. Ultramarine and the yellow ochre. And now this on its own is not a very interesting green. That's really not a green I would use ever. But it's a very good, useful green for if we add a touch of white to it. It's more than a touch. Back to the ultramarine. And now, this is kind of an olive green. Oh, more of a greenish gray. Let's take it a touch more yellow. And that's a color that I would use basically kind of for a starting olive tree. But the one that I think is even more interesting, let's take it back a bit bluer. Just a touch of the yellow ochre. So this is basically an ultramarine blue with a touch of ochre and a touch of white, but it's very, very blue still. And that is a color that I use all the time for distant mountains. And you can keep adding white to it. That is a color that I use all the time. And then let's see, not quite sure. So again, just these two colors. Let's take it back with a bit of ochre. These are kind of the warmer variations of it. But I'm going to take now a bit of Cad Yellow Medium and more Ultramarine. And then this is really getting into kind of these distant greens that I would use for the distant mountains. If you have sort of accents in the distant mountains, you can go in with a real cobalt. And then, you know, that's basically kind of what I do a lot for distant mountains with, and then as, you know, when there's more yellow, when there's more sun on them, you might get, let's actually do it this way. They're going to go more yellow. And then the mountains that are kind of in the shade over there are going to go more blue. So again, ultramarine and ochre has been my base, but now I'm adding cobalt and cobalt for when I want to go cool in the shadow areas, and a yellow, maybe even a cad yellow if I want to get the kind of warmth of the mountains. Okay, so the next green I use all the time is this is Ultramarine and Cad Yellow Medium. And this gets us about kind of one of the richest greens we can get. And, you know, it's actually quite a dark green because of the ultramarine. If we add more cadmium, so that is a very bright bush kind of close towards us. That's the green you would go for there. And let's see. The most important, I mean, most of the time when I start with these two colors, my next color is going to be Cad Red. Because basically this is my black. This is about as black as I can get. It's technically, you know, people who use Viridian and alizarin can get a very, very wonderful black with Viridian and alizarin. So basically you're making a very, very dark gray. So let's see. I tend to, you know, you go heavy on the ultramarine, very light on the yellow, and very heavy on the red. And what we're really doing is making a rich purple. So it's kind of cheating calling it a... But when I'm out in nature, where I see this color most of the time is in trees. So I think it's fair to put it in here. So when I'm using the ultramarine and the Cad yellow medium and the red, I'm often, you know, this isn't a very common green. I'll show you later a better way to get that. I'm usually looking for my dark greens when I'm doing just the Cad yellow medium and the ultramarine. Get it darker still. Okay, well that's a bit redder. So it's not really, doesn't really belong in our greens, but like I say, you only really see that ever in trees outside. So now, going the other direction though, I do often add a touch of white. So this is ultramarine, Cad yellow medium, and white, and it gets you kind of a nice dull green-gray. But the one thing I do all the time with these two colors is I just go for my, basically the brightest green you can get almost, is just with a touch of ultramarine, maybe a touch of cerulean would have been better, but you can do it with this. And this just gets you a, you know, a really bright. And you see how orange that's actually gone now? And that's even without any red in it. That's just because the ultramarine is already kind of red. This is considered our red-blue. That's considered our green-blue. This is considered the red-yellow, and that's considered the green-yellow. So we have the red-yellow and the red-blue, and you're actually getting kind of an orangish green. So that's something interesting. As we go down, we get into the Ceruleans. Because Cobalt blue is kind of a newer blue for me, I don't really use it a lot. I use it for the distances to get a brighter kind of atmospheric perspective. But I don't often look at Cobalt and think, okay, I need to make some greens with that. I have seen other artists make beautiful greens, but normally most of my greens are based with Cerulean or with ultramarine. So here we have this Cerulean and yellow ochre. And this is a green I use all the time. Basically, it's kind of a color of a mature tree in the distance. That's kind of like the perfect color for a cypress tree. If there's a cypress tree in the sun, you can take it a bit more yellow. And so that is kind of the color of a lot of these greens down in here. I will often add a touch of Cad yellow to get, you know, lighter accents in a distant tree, or you could say an area with a lot of sunlight on it. So that is cerulean, yellow ochre, and a touch of the Cad yellow light. And then you can add a bit of white to that. And then so again, cerulean, ochre, touch of Cad yellow, and then a lot of light. I mean white, titanium white. And it's a nice kind of a, you know, warmish gray green. And then let's see if we go the other way. We have Cerulean, and again, I use this base a lot, but I'll sometimes add a touch of Ultramarine to it. And this is often because I'm trying to compress hues and values in distant trees. I'll often use this cerulean and ochre as the lights, and then the ultramarine cerulean and ochre just to get kind of a dark sort of bluish gray for some of the distances. And let's see, continuing with the cerulean and the ochre. There's probably a bit of ultramarine in this too. This is with a touch of the Cad Red light and gets you a nice olive color. And I actually use this a lot with some of these kind of bushes. I mean, I realize they've gone much more red, but you know, I can start with cerulean and ochre and then really push into the red to get some of these sort of purple green bushes. We see, well, these ones are more orange, but I think in nature they probably would have been more like that. I've just been boosting them for effect. And then next would be cerulean and Cadilla light. This is a green I use all the time. Let's just put the, I mean, that is a green I've almost never used, but that's just showing you what they look like when they're together. But what I will normally do is, for one thing, you can, you know, if you have kind of like light coming through leaves where you need a really, really high chroma green, this is cerulean and cad yellow light just on its own, and then you can keep pushing it as you have more and more light. Let's take it even. So this is like a really bright yellow green, and you often see this, like I say, when you're looking towards the sun and the light's coming through the leaves. And then if you really need it, kind of one of the brightest, lightest greens, that's going to be cerulean blue, cad yellow light, and white. Okay. And then, let's see, going the other way, this is adding a lot of cerulean. So this is sort of the bluer green, and I use that a lot on, you know, sort of grass and lawns, and then we can work our way. These are colors you often see when you have the sun at your back, whereas these are colors you'll see when you're looking towards the sun. And then one other thing that I find really useful with the cad yellow light, cerulean blue, and white, I do this all the time. I add a touch of ochre to it, just because so many times you want a bright green, but you don't want this, you know, really kind of acid. So this is a color I use all the time. The base is cerulean blue and cad yellow light, and then I add a white to kind of get the lighter version, and then I add ochre because I don't want that intensity. So that's a very common green for me. Okay, and then the last sort of very common green I use is the Cerulean and Cadilla medium. And this gets you another sort of very intense green. Probably kind of the greenest green you can get. And honestly, it's not a color that I use very often. But you can take it a bit too yellow. And the same with the Cerulean and the Cad Yellow light. Cerulean and Cad Yellow, when you start to add white to it, it becomes a much more useful color. And white and yellow ochre with the base of the Cerulean and Cad Yellow medium is going to get you a nice light green that you might actually have a use for. I guess I can show you two, like I said, I don't really do this ever, but this is so Cobalt and Cad Yellow medium. I have seen other artists do very beautiful greens with Cobalt, but it's not really a color I use a lot. Actually, it does, Cobalt can be a really nice color too. So we've got a touch of the Cad Yellow and a touch of white, and then with just a ton of Cobalt, you can get these very nice sort of atmospheric, I talked about it up in there, but yeah, even bluer still. And then let's see, for one last green, because I didn't have enough dirty brushes already. Let's see, we'll start with the Cobalt and Cad Yellow medium, take it to white, take it to a very light green, and then add a touch of orange. It's way too much orange. There's a problem with these very intense Williamsburg pigments, is they're very, very strong. So you only need a tiny bit. But this is kind of color I use a lot. So also based off of that Cerulean Cad Yellow medium, and then a touch of white, and then I'll just go in with the orange, and you can, push that as far as you want to, try to get a bit of variety in your greens. So I hope that was useful. I will put sort of a high resolution image of these squares, so if you want to try to copy them at home, you've seen, I realize there's a bit of glare on the palette, but you've seen sort of how I would approach mixing. And like I say, this sort of practice then just makes it much easier when you're out in the field and you're looking at shapes and values and changing light effects. And this is a nice little base to be able to quickly mix your colors from. Okay, hope you enjoyed it.